This is Michael Reed Trice. Welcome to Religica. Shane Atkinson is from a Southern Baptist background and grew up in Jackson, Mississippi. He serves today as an associate imam and is also the Muslim life coordinator at Elon University, where he teaches, mentors, and provides emotional and spiritual support for converts in North Carolina. We caught up with Shane in Toronto last year. Take a listen.
This is a Religica production. Religica.
Thank you for joining us today at Religica, Shane. To get us started, I'd like to ask you what your current field is and what led you there.
I'm a university chaplain at Elon University. My official title is the Muslim Life Coordinator, and I was in the medical field for 20 years. I made prosthetics and orthotics. Two of my children, Nadir and Husna, they were born conjoined twins, and they had a heart condition. So while we were in the hospital with my daughters, I had an encounter with a chaplain, and it made a really big impact on me. So that kind of opened a door for me to get into hospital chaplaincy and do 4 units of clinical pastoral education at University of North Carolina Medical Center. And from when I completed my year residency at UNC, Elon had a position open for their Muslim Life Coordinator, and they invited me to join the interfaith work over at Elon, and so I gladly accepted. I was just studying with some teachers a classical text on Islamic theology called the Tahawiyah, and we were going over a section that really stressed that there's a wisdom behind everything that happens, that God has a wisdom behind everything that happens in the world. We won't always know it initially. So when this event happened, I didn't have a lot of questions. I wasn't my normal over-dramatic self. I just felt like when we received the news, well, we have to do the best we can for these children. But beyond that, it's out of our hands, and that's just something that we have to accept. And so when the chaplain came around, I didn't really have a lot of questions for the chaplain other than, how do I talk to my 3-year-old son about this? And he told me, over the years you'll be having this conversation multiple times, and as he gets older, you'll revisit this conversation and you'll just talk about it in an age-appropriate manner. So the conversation is going to change over the years. So I don't really remember what he did, but after I started studying chaplaincy, I know what he did is help create a space for me to get in touch with how I was feeling, and then kind of give voice to what I was feeling. And I wonder if a lot of people maybe get into chaplaincy and different things because it's what they're looking to heal themselves, because the first 400 hours of training for clinical pastoral education really focuses on yourself, and you come into terms with different events that happened in your life and making peace with some of that so that you can be in a better emotional and spiritual and psychological state to care for other people. So I wonder if part of it I was seeking to try to heal from trying to learn about grief and how to deal with grief and work through grief because of what had happened with my kids by enrolling and studying hospital chaplaincy. So I say because I'm passionate about compassion, but I'm suspicious if part of it. People who need that ministry themselves are the people who get into studying it.
I've known you for a while. I've been reading up about some of the work projects that you've been part of. I'm interested to learn more about your life story towards starting the conference and what led you towards organizing it.
Well, I was born in the 1970, in Jackson, Mississippi, and I went to an integrated school, and the hip-hop music in the mid-'80s really spoke a lot about social justice, and it really presented the other side of history that we don't always read about in our textbooks. So it really helped me make sense out of the nonsense I was experiencing. The teachings about racial equity within Islam really spoke to me, spoke to my heart. In the work I'm doing now, it's interesting to explore how we heal from some of this racism and some of the white supremacist ideas that we inherit as white people in this country. So on Facebook, I just kind of threw out this idea. It was kind of tongue-in-cheek. I said, which speakers would you like to see at the White American Muslim Conference? And I didn't necessarily really have in mind to have this conference, but I had attended an African American Islamic Summit a couple of years before, and I thought that's beautiful that, certain communities, no one else is going to help you fix your problems, so you have to take care of each other. And I had been a part of Imam W.D. Muhammad's community when I converted to Islam, and initially it was a little confusing. Why are you always talking about issues that affect the black community? And over time I realized that, well, if we don't take care of our own communities, no one's really going to come in and help out. So I was partially modeling that on, I think, some of the wisdom of Imam W.D. Muhammad, may Allah bless him. And so it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, and it was also saying, I think, white Muslims, we have issues that are specific to us. And I think with that Facebook post, maybe a lot of people chimed in and said, oh, you just want to have a place where white people can complain about not being treated the way they think they should, or it's about white fragility. Or some people said, there's no issue that affects a white convert that's any different than a black convert. But like within the black American Muslim community, there's still some social capital left in certain places where people remember they have a positive connotation of a Muslim. The Muslims were the people who came and cleaned up neighborhoods and got people off drugs. And maybe someone who's Muslim in your family, but with a white convert, it's a little different dynamic. We don't have a history of decades of white Muslims going into trailer parks getting people off methamphetamines and opioids. We don't have that same social capital that black Muslims had built and earned through their service to the larger community in this country. So it's interesting to have these conversations. From the knee-jerk reactions people had to that post, it was obvious this is a conversation that we need to have with people. And then some people said the only thing you need to talk about that should ever be discussed at this conference is white supremacy. And I didn't say that, but of course that's part of what we want to talk about. But I think speaking about it from a spiritual perspective too, as ridding these things from our hearts, is a beautiful way to frame that discussion. But also, white people can have struggles too. I mean, it's almost like some of these white people that were responding were kind of dismissing that white people could have any type of struggle with becoming Muslim. But I think, like I said, us not having a history of people having a positive idea about Islam within a white community, that's a unique situation to navigate for us. So it was kind of a joke, and then it's kind of, as people replied, I realized, yeah, that's a lot of stuff to talk about here. People were also bringing up about sharing Islam with the alt-right. What the strategy to share Islam with the alt-right, which I thought that's a really interesting thing that came out of that Facebook post. I ended up doing a podcast. It's called the Southern Hospitality Podcast. It's on a SoundCloud with a brother, Abraham Wishnoff. He put the post about that. He was a student of Imam W.D. Muhammad, another white student of Imam W.D. Muhammad. And so I did a podcast with him, and we talked a little bit about that we have a much better alternative for these young people that are getting recruited by the alt-right. Like, Islam is a much better option for a lot of people, where you don't have to be ashamed of your background and your heritage, and you can have that identity and have pride in your identity, but as long as it's within the context of understanding that we're all one human family, and that there's one God that created all of us, and we're from a common ancestry. But yes, there's beautiful things in our different cultures, but there's also a unity that underlies it. It's been really interesting conversations that have come out of that quirky Facebook post.
I'm curious if you've seen, from your experience being a chaplain at the university, at Elon, and from your experience being a chaplain in the hospital system, individuals rethinking some of their initial prejudices, stereotypes, and worldviews towards becoming more accepting and celebrating each other's communities.
Sure. It seems like there's certain forces who are intentionally stirring up fear between people to keep them from interacting with each other. Because from my experience, if you sit down with someone who seems different and you notice you have just this one thing in common, or you have a discussion about that, then it's much easier to talk about where you have a little bit of a difference. But sitting down and having a conversation or sharing a meal with a person, I think the people could pick up on that you sincerely cared about them. And after you started to talk a little bit, even some of these people were white folks from rural North Carolina, and maybe it was a unique situation for them, because some of the folks would ask after a while of, just making conversation with them and kind of putting them at ease. They would ask if I was a rabbi, and I would say, no, I'm Muslim. And almost always the conversation ended up like, I've never met a Muslim before. Thank you so much for coming by here and praying for us. Thanks for caring about us, because I think a lot of this boils down to nobody's ever complained that they've got too much love in this world. So when you sit down across from another human being, and you can tell they don't have any animosity towards you, and you have a little bit of a conversation, it's really hard to just demonize them and write them off. But if people are going to stoke fear and keep you from even interacting with each other, it's really easy to demonize each other. So that's one of the things that we do at the university. We've do some interfaith dinners every week. It's called Better Together. So we get together and we cook together. We share a meal together across different lines, different religious lines, just through a lot of differences, a lot of different communities. And we just sit down over a meal and get to know each other a little bit, and then have a few prompts about a certain issue. But if we can connect with someone on what we have in common, it's so much easier to discuss the things that we have different opinions on.
So for our listeners, I'm curious if there are prompts that you've seen that were very engaging within these interfaith dinners, Better Together at Elon University.
Well, it's situational. It depends on what the theme is. But the first one we did, it was about self-care. Twice as many people showed up as what we thought. And I think maybe we asked this is student-led, by the way, so we're trying to make sure that there's food and there's a space to do this in, but we're inviting students to take the lead as far as the theme and facilitating the dinner. But what I saw that was really powerful, it wasn't so much about the content, but just being in a space that you felt welcomed and respected, and where people listened to how you felt. I mean, just having people that would listen to you seemed like the most powerful aspect of the whole thing. And that the trust that was established over preparing the meal together or serving the food and eating together, it didn't take much to create a space where people felt comfortable enough to open up about the challenges that they were facing. And it seemed like that was just what a lot of people were longing for, a space that they could feel like someone cared about them, and a space that they could care about other people. So just given the space for that to happen, seems like that was the secret ingredient, or that was the prompt. Just create the space, invite the people, have the food, and it worked out beautifully. So
you've been listening to Religica. Visit us at www.religica.org.